Kia ora koutou. Welcome to our fabulous webinar tonight. Let me start by introducing our special guests. We have Dr. Sarah Probine from MIT, Manukau Institute of Technology. She's a senior lecturer there, and she teaches in the area of arts, creativity and inquiry-based learning. She has a PhD which focused on researching how children come to value and use the visual arts, both in their early childhood centres and at home. And her current research is exploring how teachers develop new knowledge and confidence to personally engage with the arts and how that can have an impact on their pedagogy. Thanks for joining us, Sarah.
Thank you for having me.
We also have Jacqui Lees here. Jacqui Lees is a early childhood teacher and a kai whakaharere at Pakuranga Baptist Kindergarten, and she's been teaching and learning alongside children in this setting since 1998. And she's fascinated by the way that children express their ideas and their theories through the visual arts, and how we as teachers can support their voice through the visual arts. So again, thanks for joining us, Jacqui.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, we'll get started tonight with a couple of questions from me before we turn to our audience tonight and find out what they would like to know from you. Let's first of all just sort of set our ground and our definitions of what we're talking about tonight. What do we actually mean by visual arts? Sarah, could you offer us an explanation of what we mean by visual arts?
Absolutely. The visual arts are the many and diverse ways and symbol systems that children explore their thinking and communicate their thinking to others. Often when we think about the visual arts, we think about drawing and painting, but actually there's so much more. Their clay work, their sculpture, they are printmaking. I'm just thinking of all the different things. Ephemeral art created with sand and natural resources. They are even things like block construction, which I know that Jacqui could talk a little bit more about.
Yeah, I was going to show a picture when I was thinking about this question of some work our children have done. Just find it. So this is the children using ephemeral art materials to think about the mountain. We were planning on visiting the Maunga near to us, and our studio teacher Olivia encouraged them to pretend they were standing on the mountain, and what would they be able to see. So this is them modelling some of their ideas, and then they used those ideas, there's another one of them, as a springboard for drawing. We usually try to fit drawing in somewhere, but it might even be that they use the sand as a tool for thinking about that too. And then that provides, I suppose, an opportunity to think through different resources, changes the way you think about things. And then when you move on to drawing and painting, what you get is something that has greater depth than if you just go straight to painting.
That's really interesting. Great examples, Jacqui. Thank you. And that was something I think you were alluding to there, was kind of the benefits of the visual arts for children's learning, and why this is a really important approach, because children can learn differently through the visual arts. So you mentioned how it enables them to think differently, and that enriches their, I suppose, their concepts, and you know, enables those fantastic drawings at the end there. So, but what would you say children can learn through the visual arts? Why is this important? Sarah, can I start with you again?
Sure. This is probably something I could think about and talk about all night.
Yeah, it's not a small question, is it?
I wrote a few notes down because I thought, gosh, you know, how many hours do we have? I think the visual arts are particularly important because, and for young children particularly, because they're pre-literate, so they can't write down their ideas yet. For some children, they're not yet verbally able to express their thinking or explain their thinking to others. And so the arts are this really incredibly rich way in which they can explore their thinking, sometimes individually, sometimes with others, and sometimes thinking to their teachers, to their families, and to others in their environment. And sometimes that's about what they're experiencing in their everyday lives, and sometimes that's not. Sometimes that's about their imagined worlds or popular culture. There's so many different facets of their experience that they're exploring through the arts. And that's just the beginning. But I have got an example, so I'll just share this example from my doctoral research, which hopefully will, can you see that? Hopefully you can see this.
Yes, we can see that, yeah.
Wonderful. This was this little boy in my doctoral research who had been on a plane, and he had flown on Jetstar. And I watched him this one afternoon having a conversation with one of his teachers and narrating his experience of catching the plane, whilst also integrating some imaginative aspects such as a monorail into his dialogue. And the arts in this instance created this platform for him to be able to revisit this experience, but also share it with his teacher. Stop the share. Hopefully that all works.
Yeah.
I think one of the really important things about art, visual arts, is that they're tangible. So, you know, a child might draw something or paint something or create it out of clay or even ephemerally and then record it digitally, but they can come back to that many, many different times. So it really gives them that opportunity to revisit their learning and share it with others and come back to it many times, which is really important to support their metacognitive processes. I also think that the visual arts are transformative, and I know, Vicky, your research has been in working theories. So it is and Jacqui, you'll have so many stories about this way that children transform their thinking or their ideas around a concept or an idea or a working theory through the process of drawing or through the process of painting or creating it and representing it. And if you're interested in that, you should definitely look up Margaret Brooks's research, because she writes a lot around that and it's really fascinating stuff. I'll stop soon, I promise. I also think that the visual arts are an incredibly powerful way through which children connect with their own cultural identities, but also the cultural identities of others. And I've got one more little story to share with you, and then I'll pass it over to Jacqui. I'll just share my screen again. And share. Sorry, everybody, technology is not my thing. How do I change to the next slide?
You use your arrow.
I did it, yay. This is also a little story from my doctoral research, and I'm able to use this little girl's name. Her name was Rose. And Rose was she still is, of Samoan and Tongan heritage, and she had this absolute fascination with wharenui. And for me, it was such an honour to watch the way that her teachers supported her to express her ideas and theories about what a wharenui might be. And they encouraged her to sit by one of her friends who had real world experience of her personal wharenui. And eventually they organised an excursion to a local wharenui where she could explore that for herself and then represent it through the visual arts. And what was really fascinating about that experience for me is once we were inside the wharenui, the children wanted to draw. That was the way that they wanted to express what it was that they were experiencing. Okay, I'll stop here. All right. Jacqui.
Thank you. Yeah, Jacqui, do you have any other examples to add?
I was just going to pick up on what Sarah said about communicating children's ideas, because I can't remember who the research was by. Sorry, I read it a long time ago, and it's become part of our way of expressing to parents what this is about. We call it first order literacy. So if children can express their ideas through drawing or through clay and communicate these ideas and other people can read them, they're on a really good pathway towards becoming increasingly literate in other ways, even, you know, including written language. So I think that idea about communicating your ideas is really important, but also the transformation as you change from one type of expression to another. So for instance, in that last one where the children went from thinking about what they might see and creating that with ephemeral art materials to building it in the sandpit, they start thinking about different ideas. They start thinking about, they were outside, so they were thinking about what was around them. Will there be these kind of leaves and things when we go to the mountain? And then painting it, They started thinking about what they like to paint, which is often their homes, and where is my home in relationship to the mountain? So as they're changing materials, their ideas and theories are developing and sometimes being challenged, and they're having to change their ideas. So it's a really powerful, powerful tool for working theories in particular, I feel.
That's interesting, Jacqui. So that as if the materials, offer different resources for children to think with, so they think differently using different materials. That's very interesting. Thank you. And what's the role of the teacher then? So clearly you've shown us some amazing work already by children. How do teachers support these kind of experiences and these really enriching experiences that you're sharing with us? Is it that the teachers should just leave children to it, or is there something that you're offering children that's enabling this kind of work? Who'd like to answer that one?
Shall I go first, Sarah?
Again, how long have we got? So this is a very contentious issue, I think, in early childhood, and something lots of teachers are thinking about. For actually over 40 years now, we've been debating what is the role of the teacher in supporting the visual arts in early childhood. So for some teachers, they still feel really hesitant to engage in children's visual arts making, and there are a myriad of reasons about why that is. Some of it is historical, some of it is thinking about, if we think about the theories before socio-cultural theories, developmental theories, it was a very hands-off approach where we were watching the child unfold naturally. I could talk about this for a long time, but also the art world has had a huge influence on this. In the modernist art period, artists like Picasso said that, he had spent many years trying to paint like Raphael, but a lifetime trying to paint like a child. And comments like that made us think that the child's art was absolutely sacred and we were really scared to go near it. And I remember feeling that way as a teacher when I first started teaching as well, what was okay for me to do. But we've been working with a socio-cultural curriculum for, strongly underpinned by socio-cultural theories for a long time now. So I think it is definitely time to really think about our practices in the visual arts. Something really interesting, well, a little bit alarming that's been happening over the last few years has been an increase in more teacher-directed arts practices. And Gay Lindsay's work, if you would like to look that up, it's also absolutely fabulous. She talks about how teachers who might have lacked experiences in the visual arts themselves within their own educations or have had negative experiences, so they're feeling a little bit nervous, they might turn to websites like Pinterest. I personally love Pinterest, but perhaps not to look for curriculum ideas in the arts. And find something that feels really safe, an activity where they know the outcome and they know it's going to go okay. And so they might choose something like that and do it because it feels safe, but at the same time, the child then in that experience has no autonomy. They can't necessarily interpret the materials in a way that makes sense for them because the outcome has already been predetermined. So at the same time as these two different ends of the spectrum, teachers who are feeling really nervous to engage with children and teachers who are feeling, oh gosh, maybe if I direct it, it'll feel a little bit better. There are many teachers who are doing some really exciting things in the visual arts with children. They're having conversations with children. They are giving children opportunities to evaluate their art, revisit their art, have conversations about their art with their peers, all of the things that you, Jacqui, and your team are doing in many other early childhood communities as well. But one of the things I've been really interested in my research is finding those teachers and having conversations with them and sharing it with the wider community, because I think those stories are really important, particularly for those teachers who want to develop this area of their practice. I'll stop now.
Jacqui, what would you like to add to, what are your ideas about the teacher's role? How do you and your team see that in relation to visual arts?
As Sarah said, if we're co-constructing with children, then we are part of it. And I always think it's really interesting because people talk about the environment as the third teacher, which means that we're part of that environment, and teachers provide a very real scaffold to what children are doing, and having those conversations, as Sarah said, is a really important thing. So I was going to share a little story if I can get that. There we go. So it's back at the mountain that we've been on a bit of a journey getting to know our local area. In fact, we still are. And so we went on a trip to visit our local maunga. And when we came back, what the children were talking about was a fascination with the colours they had seen. And so they chose bits of wood from the carpentry area and started painting them with Tina. And this is Tina in the picture, one of my teachers. And they started building mountains. First of all, they built them in heaps on the floor. And then we started talking about the possibility of creating a mural and looked at what murals might look like. And we started building them up the wall. So Tina built bits of cardboard. But she's sitting there chatting with this little guy about what he noticed and how he saw the colours and how he saw the mountain forming. And this process of, it's not a small process. Once you get involved and you start talking with children about their ideas, it can go for a long time. This process of creating a mural, I think, took us close on 3 months. And every day they were remaking. And over at the side, in the little pink hat, is somebody who has now taken on the teacher's role. And she's standing there asking questions. At this particular point in time, she's critiquing what the other person is doing. I don't know if you can tell by her crossed hands, but she doesn't quite agree that the mountain is that shape. So she was watching, listening. Tina took a moment to take a photograph and trusted her enough to know that the conversation was continuing. And that's one of the things I think that's really wonderful. Well, for me, working in a mixed age centre, it works really well because the older children start to take on that role of mentor and provocateur, I suppose you would say, and they're asking the kind of questions that make their peers think about what they're doing. So I think that's our role as teachers, is to engage and then to share that role with other people who want to take it on. So it becomes a truly collaborative work with dialogue as part of its basis. I'll go out of that. She then decided to draw for him what she thought was a better look for the mountain. So here she is drawing her ideas that then challenge his.
And there, Jacqui, as well, you know, there's the idea of creating this mural to go up the wall, just creating these, that's a provocation in itself, isn't it? So the teacher took the child's idea and kind of offered another spin on it, I suppose, so they could explore it in a different way. That was, again, quite an intentional act on the part of the teacher. So, yeah, great example. Thank you. I'd like to open the floor now to our audience tonight. If they have any questions, to please type them into the chat box, and I'll do my best to ask them of Sarah and Jacqui tonight. So just to start off with some questions from our audience, I've got a question about sustainability and how we might be able to offer the visual arts in a sustainable way. And I think some of the things that you've, in the images you've shared us, kind of allude to the kinds of things that resources, I suppose, that teachers can use that are very sustainable. Who'd like to? Sarah, shall I start with you?
Sure. I'm really sad we're in lockdown in Auckland, because if we hadn't been, I was going to bring some collections from work home with me tonight to share with you all. But I mean, I'm personally very passionate about sustainability in the arts, and I know that, Jacqui, you are, and your centre is as well. I think the visual arts are an area where we can make a real difference because there are so many materials that we're working with. I think the main thing when you're thinking about sustainability and thoughtful use of materials is actually to create a culture in our centres where children really respect and care for the materials that they're working with. So that might be achieved by presenting things really beautifully to children. You know, when you put something beautifully in a basket, or you arrange your materials in a jar, you're showing respect for the materials already. And then having conversations with children about caring for those materials. You know, we use paper for this, but if it's not used anymore, this is where we put it to recycle it. So that's one, I think, really integrally important thing that you can do. Another thing is to think about the materials we're using. Ephemeral art, you know, going out into the community, into nature, into your garden and collecting natural resources, creating with them, digitally recording the art, and then carefully putting those resources back is another way that we can really show our respect for Papatūānuku. And I would have loved to bring home my beautiful junk collection, which is really just recycled stuff, junk that we all collect around the house. And I, from one of my research centres involved in my doctoral research, was inspired to arrange my beautiful junk into jars and containers that were colour coordinated. And that really, really makes me happy in an aesthetic way. And I've just got a few, sorry, another screen's just come up. I just walked around my house a few minutes before and found a few little bits and pieces, like literally from walking around my house and my family's rubbish bins, I found a collection of white, beautiful junk. So I would arrange these things for children, and they could create with those again and again and again. And again, they can be involved in that process of using these materials. None of this costs a thing. It's all aesthetically incredibly satisfying. And it means we're not using things like those foam shapes that you can order from catalogues and just get flushed down the drain, or piles of glue, or, you know, heaps of acrylic paint. So there are many things we can do. But Jacqui will probably have practical examples.
Well, we're an enviro school, so we're really passionate about not creating waste, and we talk quite a lot about the resources we use, but one of the words we've stopped using, Sarah, is junk. Because,
it's true.
There's such a lot of stuff out there that gets labelled junk or rubbish that's actually really useful and valuable resources. And so one of the shifts in our language I've noticed is that the children start saying, what resources can we find? And I think that's a really powerful shift.
It's so true.
I am really excited about it. And we go out walking in our local area a lot. So we take baskets and we collect the things that have fallen. We try not to pick too much, but collect that. Somehow the leaves that are on the trees always look much more enticing, but never mind. We try to collect the things, and there's something about having collected your own resources that makes it a really meaningful experience for children, I think, with ephemeral arts. And they are really passionate about caring for them because they've collected them. In fact, I think if I can find, I'll share my screen again. Apart from the bamboo, which is purchased, the other resources are all collected. And what we noticed was that children began positioning things really carefully, and then looking to see how they could add. Other children were coming and looking to see how they could add, because the children were quite protective of what they had. So I think that that's a really powerful thing. And as Sarah said, we did take photos, and when we gave the children the photos back, I don't know if you can see, they're using them on the clipboard and they're adding to that by drawing, which I found was really quite fascinating, actually, because they were communicating even more ideas as they added to what they created. So those things become treasures, taonga, that we can use with children and then reuse again another day. And I think that's a really important thing.
Yes, yeah, lovely, thank you. And I think I was also thinking, when you talked about the word junk, how we have resource recovery centres and things like that, don't we, too? And they're great places to go and find things too, but they are, you know, it's thinking about our rubbish as a resource rather than rubbish. Yeah.
I will not use the word junk again. Treasure.
So many questions coming in. What about doing visual arts with infants and toddlers? Have you got any tips for our audience there?
I'm happy to start with this one. I think sometimes we feel a little bit of pressure when we're working with infants and toddlers to produce a product. And, you know, I don't know if anyone's read the work of Felicity McArdle, who is one of my favourite researchers, but she uses the term bunny bum art. And I love that term because it really just encapsulates what I'm talking about. You know, when we feel like we might need to make footprints or handprints of, you know, infants' hands and then make them into a chicken or some kind of creature. That's what Felicity McArdle is talking about when she's talking about bunny bum art. So once we stop worrying about a product and we start thinking about what visual art is, I think if you think about aesthetic experiences for infants and toddlers, you know, a huge block of clay, just a block of clay in the middle of the floor over a series of weeks that infants can come back to again and again and again and pull tiny little bits off and feel and begin to transform. Because really the first wonderful thing about the visual arts, I think, that children discover is that they can transform materials. And when you think about that, that's amazing. What a powerful, powerful experience for children. So just being able to move around clay, little bits of clay, or move paint on a table, or touch the grass, or spend time looking at beautifully aesthetic things, light, is a wonderful beginning, I think, for very young children, and not worrying about making a product. It just doesn't matter. Do you have anything to add to that, Jacqui?
I was just thinking about the change from junk to resources and going from art to aesthetic experience. I think is actually that change of language actually changes what you anticipate. And I think that's one that I really like, and I'll hold on to. Thank you, Sarah. Actually, I don't work with under twos, but I think that offering them opportunities to experience lots of different things is what is going to provoke learning and then making meaning out of it.
Actually, when I was thinking about this webinar and I prepared a few notes, and I was thinking about what is the shift that we need to make. And this relates to infants and toddlers, but I think it relates to the visual arts and you know, for all children, is that I think there needs to be a shift in the culture from thinking about visual art as a product or something beautiful or something finished that we create, where we compare and we worry about how it looks, to instead thinking about it as a tool for thinking and exploring. And that might be aesthetic exploration, it might be exploration of a working theory, it might be exploring an idea, it might be forming a friendship, but it's just this means through which we can make sense of experience. And once we do that, it's a place where we can make mistakes. And I think that's the main thing that we need to teach children, is that, I mean, I'm someone who creates art in my own life when I have time. I love to draw and I paint, and a lot of my art is just awful. I mean, I make bad art sometimes, but I accept that I have to make a lot of bad art to make good art. And I think we need to teach our children that. And that's what worries me, I think, about the fact that many of us feel like we need to create, you know, stay in a hands-off position, is because if we're creating alongside children or talking alongside children, we can talk about our own mistakes and our own processes for fixing those mistakes and moving through them as artists and art makers, and that everyone can make art, not just particularly talented people.
You're right, that's quite a big shift, isn't it?
Yeah,
I love the idea of mistakes, because filmmaking is an art that has many mistakes, and you've got to do a retake. I grew up with a father who liked making movies, and he would use that language about that was a missed take, we're going to do a retake. So I think with art we have to establish in our minds that a mistake is not the end. Actually, there can be something beautiful that comes out of a mistake. There can be a blooper that you didn't know was going to exist that could be even more beautiful than what you were going for. But that it's an opportunity for learning.
Yeah, thank you. I want to go a bit more deeply into the process, I suppose, really. Really trying to unpack what it is that you do as teachers to support, this kind of visual art experience for children. So I think people are wondering kind of like, where do you begin? So how did you, Jacqui, if I can direct this to you, how did you start children off on this idea of exploring mountains through, the different art experiences that you offered? Where did that come from? Not from Pinterest, as Sarah has said. So if you could just talk to us about where these kind of little seeds of ideas for the visual art experiences that you've shared with us came from.
Okay, well, I work in a centre that's very multicultural. We have about 17 or 18 different languages spoken in our centre. And we were doing a bit of research with the University of Waikato on belonging and how you can develop a sense of belonging in a new country that you move to as an immigrant, while still retaining a sense of belonging to your own home culture and to the place you come from. So we started thinking about in what way we might kind of propose this to the children. And we started thinking about pepeha actually, and asking children what places they connect to. And as we were out on a walk one day, some of our children noticed Mount Wellington, Monterey. We could see it from where we were walking, and they started talking about this is our mountain. So we planned a trip to go to see our mountain. Now, nothing in early childhood ever goes quite the way you anticipate. So we rocked up in a bus with about 30 parents and 45 children to visit Mount Wellington on a day when they had closed it for tree felling. And we had to make a quick skip and go to a different mountain. We went to Pigeon Mountain, Ohuirangi. And that in itself, the things that happen in life actually colour what you will see out of it. So the children began talking about the fact that Ohuirangi had called to us, that Monterey was having a bad day and didn't really want to see us, but Ohuirangi had whispered to the teachers, come visit me, because she hadn't seen children for a long time. And so the children felt a really deep connection to the mountain. They personified her. She was lonely. She wanted to come to kindy, but she couldn't move. She hadn't been able to walk for 1,000 years. So she needed us to come to her. So the mountain investigation began. It was obvious and clear to us that the children had a real relationship with this place and wanted to express their ideas. So it began from there. And for me, the biggest part of beginning anything is listening. Listening to see what's dear to your children, what are they passionate about. And I think that a lot of times we can get hooked up on the big ideas, but sometimes it's the small, quiet ideas that have traction and longevity because they underpin everything. So this idea of relationship with anything, with other people in your centre, with teachers, with families, this idea of relationship is really important to children, and they want to have relationship with places and things, as it says in Te Whāriki. So relationship is often a really good place to start.
Thank you, Jacqui. It's wise words. And something else that teachers listening tonight are wondering is about how much to kind of direct that experience. So, is it important to kind of give children a bit of an overview of what they're aiming for in terms of, today we are making a mountain or today we're making kites, while allowing that creativity of how they're going to do that to be child-led? How important is it to kind of set a bit of a framework, I suppose, around the art? Any thoughts on that?
Sometimes there is a framework around things and sometimes there isn't. I guess it depends on the experience. Like if it was coming up to Matariki and we had been talking about kites, I would feel quite happy to say, I wonder if we were going to make a kite, how would we start? Yeah. What resources would we need? But I think it's a matter of holding things a little bit loosely and proposing ideas to children with the notion that they can say no.
I think, can I just jump in there, Jacqui? Because I think you said something so important there. I think the language in which you're using to ask the question is integral. So if you were to say to children, today we're making kites, that's an expectation that you're again going to end up with a kite. Whereas if you pose the question like you just said, Jacqui, and I love a good wonder question, I think we should be asking those all day. I wonder what a kite might look like. I wonder if we can make a kite. It doesn't matter if you don't end up making a kite when you ask a question or pose a question that way. I wonder what your ideas about kites are.
And how comfortable do you feel to jump into something children? It seemed from your examples, Jacqui, that this happened a little bit in your centre, that your teachers can jump in and offer a little bit of teaching or a bit of scaffolding for a particular skill for children to be able to, achieve something they're intending. Is that part of a good visual arts teacher?
I think the wondering comes in there too. You know, I wonder if you need a little bit of help, because then they have the opportunity to say, no, I'm fine, thank you.
Yeah.
But I wonder if you would like me to show you how I use clay. I wonder if you would like me to show you how I use my paintbrush, because I paint a lot and I really enjoy it.
Yeah.
So those kind of things, but not necessarily assuming that every child wants your assistance.
Okay.
I agree. I think that's so important. Knowing your children and knowing what they want to know, but also what they do know and who they are and how it's going to affect them if you do suggest that you help them. But at the same time, we're happy to teach children all sorts of things in early childhood: how to tie their shoelaces, how to spell their names, how to count. And yet when it comes to the visual arts, sometimes we feel really worried about showing them how to hold a paintbrush or how to mix colours or how to roll the clay. So I think it's absolutely fine to teach children technique, but you have to have that balance of knowing what it is that they need to know. And I guess that's the beauty of co-construction, is where you're in that interrelationship and the child's teaching you something and you're teaching them something, but you both know what each other need.
What do you think about offering visual examples? Can they support children's creativity, or can they hinder creativity?
What do you think, Jacqui?
It's a big question.
It's a very big question.
I mean, I think we look at artists. We had, just to give you an example of an experience in our centre, our children were really interested in the city at one stage and were drawing a lot of pictures of the city, and they were very organic looking. And then we had a little girl who went to Saturday art classes, who came in and drew something that could almost have been done with a ruler. It was very, very perfect. And everybody stopped drawing. And so we looked at this as a provocation for teachers. Okay, how do we do something about that? So we looked for other artists like Huntavasa, who had a very organic kind of style. And we started looking at pictures of his work and saying that some artists like to draw like this. But it's not something that I would push out as at the beginning of something. It might be that an opportunity comes up to discuss other artists' work, but not that this is what we want to create in a kind of model way.
I agree with everything you just said, Jacqui. Beautifully put. Yeah.
So
I think, I was just going to say, I think it's important to have conversations about artists and art and images and the things that we're seeing all the time, but you probably wouldn't put up a provocation of an artist and say, everybody, we're going to paint sunflowers today. That might be a bit much. And as Jacqui said, I think, I've experienced that myself too with my own children. If you go too far with the provocation, it can be quite intimidating. And again, it comes down to knowing your children.
Okay, I've got so many wonderful questions coming through. What about when you have reluctant artists, or somebody's mentioned that maybe boys are not so interested in making visual arts in their particular centre? Have you any suggestions for encouraging all children to engage in visual arts? Is that important?
There's been some interesting research about boys actually, that sometimes they might need to use not just fine motor but large motor skills to draw. So if you take it outside and you make it big, if you provide opportunities to create not just at a table but on the ground, ephemeral art on a large sheet would be another way of achieving that. Those are ways that can engage more groups of children. What do you think, Jacqui?
Well, I was just thinking about that picture of the little boy creating the mountain in the sandpit. That was a visual art experience, and we respected it like that, but he really liked the sandpit. So the sandpit was where he was going to create. Exactly. And, you know, there's all sorts of arts are out there. I mean, if you think about the people who are out creating ephemeral art in the wilderness, they're not in a studio, they're not working on paper, but the art that they create, earth art, is respected widely. So I think it's about us changing our view of what the visual arts are.
I think so too.
Jacqui, earlier on you alluded to how part of your belonging project was about supporting children's culture and identity. Is that something that you can use visual arts as a sort of support for children to explore culture and identity, and how do you do that?
For me it is. We were talking about pepeha and they got interested in the mountain, but for a lot of our children, the Ohuirangi or Mongarei are mountains where they live now, but they also had mountains in their home countries that some of them can recall, and even if they can't, you can still look at them. You just need to Google map places and you can learn about somebody's mountain if they know the name of it. And the parents really strongly supported the research we were doing and were really interested in it. And so were giving us the names of the places where they had come from, the rivers and the mountains. And so we were making connections across multiple landscapes. Do the mountains in China, where you're from, look different than the mountains in New Zealand? And we discovered some amazing things about our children. Some of our families then, as approaching the Christmas holidays, were going back to visit places. Now that's very much about belonging and connection and cultural responsiveness, isn't it? Because they had developed such an interest through the arts that they were then building on that.
Thank you. Well, we're rapidly running out of time and it's such a disappointment to me, but I'll just finish with a final question, and I'll just direct this one to you, Sarah, if I can. Just about when we invite children to create art and children feel very reluctant and they say, you know, I can't, or they, you know, how do you respond to a child who says, I can't draw that?
Well, I think that probably many of us as adults would say that we can't create art. I'm not good at creating art. This is something I'm actually really interested in. Where does it happen? Where does it start? And it often starts in early childhood or maybe a little bit later on in primary school or intermediate, where we might have a negative experience where someone has looked at our art and they've said, that's not good. And the arts are so wrapped up with our identities, who we are as people, that can really hurt. And so at that point, we kind of close off our creativity and our artistic sides, and we don't want to create art anymore. So I think that's a really important moment when a child says, I can't make art, that we actually listen and find a way around that. And I don't think it's necessarily about saying to that child, yes, you can, come on, let's go sit down and draw something. But instead thinking about, well, I think you can. How could we go about this? What is it you're trying to achieve? Are there some ways that I could help you? Maybe we could go and find a book. Maybe it's the child. I'm just thinking of an experience of mine many years ago as a teacher. A child wanted to draw a horse, and you know, we thought about it. We did some research. We talked about what they wanted to do, and I began to ask questions. Well, what does a horse have? You know, how many legs? Well, 4. Well, maybe we could start with the legs. Do you think you could draw the legs? And we began that way, and slowly they managed to achieve it. And it's something that might make it take a long time. but I think it's certainly worth pursuing. And also I think it's about the cultures of our centres, you know, creating spaces where it is okay to make mistakes, where we understand that art doesn't always have to represent something. I don't always want to draw something. Sometimes I just want to muck around with colour and mixing, and that's okay. So creating that culture, I think, is really important, and then finding ways in. Let's just make the first step.
Yeah. Somebody said that on the chat, actually. They said that Anne Pello says that when children say they can't, they actually might just be asking, they're saying that they don't know how to start.
Yeah,
and maybe just helping them with the start. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. We've been through a lot tonight. I know we could do another whole webinar, I think, on how teachers might develop their own visual arts expertise in order to feel more confident supporting children. And there's been some questions around that, but I think that's maybe another webinar in the future for us. Thank you so much for what you've shared with us tonight. There's been some beautiful examples around changing our language, and alongside that changing our thinking around what visual arts are, what we can expect for children in their visual art experiences, and just really opening that up in the ways that you've shown us with a variety of materials. And yeah, I found that really inspiring personally. Do you have something that you would like to sort of offer as a conclusion, or kind of a take-home message that you'd like to encourage teachers to maybe try out in their practice over the next few weeks? Anything you'd like to offer? Sarah, can I start with you?
Golly gosh, I was meant to think of a take-home. Whoopsie. It's been a busy day.
There's been so much that you've offered. What would you think would be the key thing
I think
to take away from this webinar?
If you're a teacher who's feeling a lack of confidence or ability, I think that, and as you said, Vicky, it's something maybe for another conversation on another day, but in relation to my other research, I think the most important thing you can do is to nurture your own artistic identity. So to find ways to engage in art and enjoy art in your own life without giving yourself a hard time about it. Maybe you might start sketching or mucking around with watercolour paint, or maybe just creating ephemeral art in the garden. Because I think once you start to create art yourself, one, you realise it's a wonderfully enjoyable process, but also you begin to really empathise with the challenges and struggles that children might encounter as well. So that would be my take home.
And Jacqui, what about you? Has there been something that's been really sort of pivotal in your centre for changing the way that you think about visual arts with children that you could share?
I think as teachers, we need to play a bit more with the resources that we're offering children, so that we understand the potentials of it. You know, I think staff meetings can be really boring. They might be much more fun if we spent time playing with clay or painting a picture of the other people at the staff meeting. And maybe we would learn about, you know, just relaxing and enjoying the process instead of being so hung up on what it's going to look like at the end.
Because that's what we really need to be modelling to children, isn't it? So we need to live it a little bit first.
Yeah, I think so.
Thank you so much. Some wonderful insights tonight. Thank you so much for sharing them with us. Please do go and have a look at our visual arts resources on our website. And also some people are also asking about the names that you mentioned, Sarah, for the research that's been done. So what I'll do is I'll grab those off you and I'll put those online when we put the video up. So anyone who wants to watch this again, you'll also find that some reading ideas there from Sarah. So thank you so much for joining us, and good night to you all.
Thank you for having us. Bye-bye, everybody.